Okay, let's talk about some common types of network attacks, and we're going to break these down into four big categories: reconnaissance attacks, access attacks, social engineering attacks, and denial of service attacks. And we'll start with this last one actually first. Now, a denial of service attack. The denial of service attack is not about gaining access to information. It's not about stealing or destroying information. The goal of a denial of service attack or a distributed denial of service attack is just to disrupt access to a network or a service. Basically, it's to be annoying. We want to take something down. We want to take something offline. There's a couple of different broad categories of denial of service attacks. So one of them is to send an overwhelming amount of traffic. So if I can get like 50,000, 100,000 devices to all send traffic to the same IP address at the same time, I'm going to send an overwhelming amount of traffic and I'm going to swamp that device. I'm going to swamp the bandwidth. That device is going to be taken offline. It's not going to be functional because we're sending so much data it just can't process it. It might take more than 100,000 devices depending on what you're doing, but that's the idea, is we're sending in an overwhelming quantity of traffic so that it just swamps the bandwidth and takes that particular service offline. Now, that kind of attack has to be stopped by an upstream provider. If I'm the target of an attack and I have a bunch of stuff coming in and it's swamping my incoming bandwidth, I can't do anything about that attack other than talk to my ISP and see if I can get them to block it. So if I can get them to block that incoming traffic, then it frees up my line. I'm able to be functional again. So that's the first type of denial of service attack. Let's just overwhelm bandwidth and we'll just swamp the target. The second one is to send a maliciously formatted packet. And the idea here is I want to do something that send something that causes the receiving system to either hesitate and slow down or to crash. So I'm going to send it something that's going to confuse it and make it stop functioning. Now again, both of that, by the way, can typically be fixed by long term by applying patches or applying some type of input analysis. This is going to stop that type of traffic from coming in. So those are denial of service attacks. They're kind of in a category all on their own. Now, these the first two, reconnaissance attacks and access attacks, these tend to go together. So the idea of a reconnaissance attack, I'm not trying to actually get anything. I'm trying to discover weaknesses. So these types of attacks are about gathering information. So the first type, and the goal, by the way, is learn more about the network so that I'm trying to attack, or the system that I'm trying to attack, so I can discover some weaknesses about it and try to do whatever it is that I'm trying to do with that. Okay, the first step of this, normally we don't even think of it as an attack. It's gathering information. So if I'm trying to attack somebody, I'm going to try to gather information about the target. I can run whois queries. I can do DNS lookups. I can try to figure out as much information as I can. And depending on how I'm going to attack, I might be looking for different types of information. Right? If I'm going to launch a technical attack, then I'm going to need technical information. If I'm going to launch a social engineering attack, then I'm trying to gather personal information about the people who work at that organization. So it's just gather information. Another thing we can do is we can ping sweep the target's network. So for example, I discover through my research that that they're using an IP address in a specific range. I can try to ping sweep that range. And there are some tools out there that'll automate ping sweeps, and a lot of these other attacks as well. The ping sweep, I'm going to ping a range of addresses, and I'm just going to see who replies. Now, this, by the way, is the reason some providers or some companies will actually block incoming ping requests, because it stops that ping sweep. But if that's not done, then I'll ping a range of addresses, and I'll see which ones reply. And the ones that reply, I know there's a system there that I might try to attack. So something that goes along with ping sweeping is this idea of port scanning. Now, with a port scan, I'll specify a range of addresses or a range of ports on an address that I want to scan. And my port scanner, again, it's going to be an automated tool. It will try to connect to every port within this particular range. And if I get a response that, if I can create a connection, then I know that there's a service there that I might be able to attack. For example, if I'm running a web server, it's probably going to be listening in port 80 and port 443. So if I port scan that, I should get a response from port 80 and port 443 that tells me, hey, they're running a web server. Now let me run some vulnerability scans. So you're going to see this one right here. A vulnerability scanner will look and try to analyze, all right, what software are they running? What web server are they running? What OS are they running? And what versions of that are there? Are there any vulnerabilities we might be able to take advantage of? So all of this is just gathering information about the target. The last step of this is going to be something like running an exploitation tool. And again, you can find a bunch of them out there. I'm not going to list them here. But that exploitation tool will try to connect to that vulnerability, take advantage of that vulnerability by connecting to that IP address and that port that we discovered that's open. We'll try to see if there's some exploits that we can run and maybe begin to start cracking that system. So this whole range of reconnaissance attacks is all about, I want to gather information. Now, from there, we move on to access attacks. And the idea of an access attack is I want to exploit a vulnerability, hopefully that I discovered during a reconnaissance attack. I want to I want to exploit this vulnerability to gain access to data that I should not have access to. And it can be a variety of different things, right? So I can try to be doing data theft. Okay, I'm going to steal your data because I want to know what you have. It can be data manipulation. I'm going to leave the data there. I just want to change it in a way that benefits me. Classic example is I want to access the data on my paycheck and add a couple more zeros to it. But there's lots of other types of data manipulation that we could do. And then data destruction, or creating a data loss scenario where I'm going to try to destroy a bunch of data. In a data theft scenario, you can keep your data, I don't care, I just want my own copy of it. In a data destruction scenario, I'm going to try to destroy your data. This actually can be quite damaging to an organization. Statistically, most organizations, regardless of their size, that have a major data loss event, be it due to an access attack or hardware failure, they didn't have a backup, fire and they didn't have an offsite backup, something like that. Most organizations that have a major data loss do not recover and are out of business within 5 years. So data is that important to an organization. So I might try to gain access so that I can destroy the data. So here's some common types of access attacks. So password attacks like brute force password attack. And there are other things we can do, rainbow tables, other ways. But the idea is I'm going to try to gather information. I'm going to try to get a password so that I can use that password to access your system. And even something like trying to get a keylogger loaded so that I can capture somebody's password and then turn around and use it. That's a type of password attack. Spoofing IP or MAC addresses, or DHCP spoofing, can be great if you're trying to attack because it allows you with a little sophistication to set up a man-in-the-middle attack and begin stealing data. Another example would be trust exploitation. I'm trying to attack company A. Company A has lots of controls in place. I'm having a hard time doing that. But company A trusts company B. What if I could hack company B? They might not be quite as strong, then I can exploit that trust that company A has with company B. Port redirection, man-in-the-middle attacks, where through DHCP or access points, rogue access points can be used for this as well, where I try to get myself in between communication between your clients and your servers. And if I can do that, then I can see that traffic going back and forth. That's a man-in-the-middle attack. And then buffer overflow attacks. A type of this might be an SQL injection attack, or there's several other different types. But the idea is I want to put data into your system in such a way that it causes your system to fail and leaves it open for me to access it. So all of those are access attacks. Now, big thing here. Access attacks, all the ones we just listed, many of them are technical attacks. So I can use technical means to try to defend against it. I can use complex password policies, password changes. I can do things to block DHCP spoofing. I can enable things on my switches to hopefully detect IP or MAC spoofing. So there's lots of things I can do, lots of technical controls I can use to try to block access attacks, which is where social engineering attacks come in. Because social engineering, this is not about using a technology. This is about trying to manipulate people. And that's the key thing. I want to manipulate people into performing actions or sharing privileged information. So these types of attacks are much harder to stop with technical controls. As we go through some of these here in a minute, you'll see some of them we actually can at least try to put some controls in place, but some of them you just can't. And so a lot of times we need to do quality training with people to help them recognize risky behavior, recognize potential social engineering attacks, and our users become our biggest allies in defeating social engineering attacks. So some types of attacks. So pretexting. Okay, I'm going to pretend that I need information. I actually don't need it. I'm going to pretext, so I'm going to pretend like I need that information, try to get you to share it. Phishing is based on I'm going to send out text messages or email messages, try to get people to bite on the hook and respond to me when they shouldn't. Spear phishing, this tends to be generic. I'm going to do send out a ton of things and hope I get a few responses. Spear phishing tends to be I'm going after a specific person. This is where you get back to that reconnaissance attack. I've tried to gather information. Maybe I've discovered who your CFO is, so I'm going to spearfish your CFO. I'm not going to send something to everybody in your organization. I'm going to just send it to your CFO, and I'm going to pretext and say, hey, I need this for your IRS return or something like that. Another term that you'll hear sometimes is whaling. Spear phishing just means it's very targeted. Whaling means I'm targeting a very, very big fish. Something for something attacks. Hey, I need you to do something for me. What can I do for you? Or I just did this for you. Now I need you to do something for me. Baiting, impersonation, pretending to be somebody that we're not. Tailgating. This is a way of gaining access to restricted areas. Okay, you go up to a door, there's a lock, you have to swipe it. So you wait for somebody else to go in and then you try to follow in behind him. You're tailgating. Shoulder surfing, looking over somebody's shoulder, or dumpster diving, just trying to go get information from stuff that people have thrown away. So 4 broad categories of network attacks: reconnaissance attacks, access attacks, social engineering attacks, and denial of service attacks. Remember, all of them have a very different function, a very different purpose. When you see people, denial of service attacks are frequently done by people who are not sophisticated. They've gotten a tool and they're just launching the tool. But if you're the target of somebody who's a little more sophisticated, you're going to see some of these reconnaissance attacks and some of these access attacks and maybe even social engineering attacks. This is actually a big, big area of problems for a lot of networks. You're going to see these run in combination. So you want to be aware of it early on so that you can realize, hey, we might be under attack. What can we do to try to prevent this? Okay, there we go. Hopefully that gives you some ideas about some common network attacks. And at least with social engineering, remember, we have a really hard time stopping these with technical controls. We tend to have much more success stopping these with user training. And that's obviously got to be something that happens beforehand, before the attack actually takes place. All right, in next video, we're going to talk about some network security tools or solutions.